Continuing our strategy journey, this is Paul Friga, and now I'm going to talk to you about alignment, strategic alignment, aligning the enterprise strategy with unit level strategy. It's quite clear by now that strategy is one of the most important elements of an organization's success. But remember, strategy occurs at different levels of an organization. For example, the highest level is called the enterprise strategy or the corporate strategy. These answer the questions of where should we compete and what's our portfolio of businesses. A level below that would be business unit strategy. This is a particular aspect of business, whether it's geographic or product or services. How do we go to market with those? And then underneath that would be functional strategies. So these are activities or function areas such as marketing, R&D, production, finance, and HR. Each one of those levels need to have their own strategies, their own mission, their own vision, their own priorities, and their own resources. But what's critical for success is to have these aligned. You must align the business units and the support units all the way down to employees. And the focus of my talk today is about aligning the business units with the enterprise level strategy. So thinking about the business unit, your objective is to cascade and embed the corporate strategy so that the unit also knows that they're operating and connecting to some part of that higher level strategy. Not all the parts of the higher level strategy, but some parts of it. Of course, they should espouse the values and live the mission as well. The barriers are that these are typically approved and developed independently, and sometimes it's confusing to have multiple layers of the strategy. But the way to do it is to use cascading of maps and to have vertical and or horizontal alignment. Below that, you would have functional units. They also need to be supported with their own strategies all the way down to employees. Here's an example. This is from the Canadian Blood Services strategy map. So they had three big buckets: safety, operational excellence, plan for tomorrow. Call those the priorities. And if you go all the way down to the beginning, you start with the enabling resources or the values. They need to have a healthy financial structure. They also need to build facilities for the operational environment. Using the strategy map or the balanced scorecard, you have to start with what would enable us to execute. And then they have the strategic assets by each one of those categories of safety, operational excellence, and planning for tomorrow. That enables you to have strategic action, starts getting into some of the differentiation and the customer service excellence to allow you to fulfill your mission. So by doing this, you can show the theme and the cascading of the unit's priorities all the way aligned with the mission of the organization. Remember, each unit needs to use the same philosophy that we talked about before for strategic planning and capture their own mission, their own vision, and their own values. Very common that those values would be the same for the enterprise strategy as well as a unit, but they might operationalize it in a bit different way. Remember the Peter Drucker theory of a t-shirt, so that each unit should be able to have their mission, vision, and values on a t-shirt, and then that's going to feed the priorities, objectives, initiatives, and making sure they're all aligned. This goal of alignment needs to be both vertical and horizontal. What I mean by that is you're going from top to bottom in terms of the vertical alignment, but you're also going to go horizontal. So you might have, for example, in an institution like a university, you might have a system level goals, and then you might have units, meaning the universities themselves, and then they can have departments or schools below the units, all the way down to teams and individuals. So they might work, vertically and horizontally, but they need to know what everybody's working on. Let me give you a case example of this. UNC Chapel Hill. We're part of the UNC higher education system. So let's go all the way to the top. The enterprise strategy is encompassing 17 diverse constituent institutions, 16 are higher ed, and they all have education, research, and public service. They're all sharing in the mission of the university, which is discover, create, transmit, and apply knowledge that addresses the needs of individuals and societies. But then they have to get some guidance. It's very difficult when you have such a diverse group of institutions all with one strategy. So how can you pull those together? They went through a very robust strategic planning exercise, and they identified access, affordability, and efficiency, student success, economic impact, community engagement, and then excellence and diverse institutions as their core pillars. Let's call these the key priorities. That's going to need to cascade down but differently to the different institutions within the system. Let's go one level further. Access, affordability, student success, economic impact, excellence. They all had specific objectives that they were setting. So for the next time period, we want to accomplish certain things. These are sometimes called goals, as we referred to earlier. Now, these specific objectives in terms of the next level down for each institution will vary by the institution and their unique mission. But we're driving for the same thing. So the alignment comes from the top down. Here's an example of how that gets all the way down to UNC Chapel Hill, which is one unit within the system. So the system has a dashboard, and we're focusing on increasing low-income enrollment. So they will set their goals, and then Chapel Hill will set its goals. Of course, each of the other institutions in the system will also have theirs. When they set those goals or those targets, they're also going to have a set of initiatives to make that happen. But that's the key, though, to have alignment, but allow for unique differentiation. In this case, this slide shows all the key distinct areas of both the university and the system has differentiation as well. So you can see the University of Chapel Hill is focused on distinct area of creating scientists, learning by connecting, doing, and making. And then the distinct area, that number 2, is undergraduate business education. It's good to highlight how multiple units within an institution or within a system will have different things that they're striving for. They need their own individual differentiation. Now that we've talked about alignment from the enterprise level down to the unit, I want to also talk about the importance of strategic communication to successfully execute your strategy. It's no question that the organizations who communicate better, both internally and externally, have a higher market premium. Shareholder returns are over 50%, and the reason why is because they consider their employee engagement as well as their customer engagement, and communication is a key element to making that happen. If engagement is higher with your employees, you're much less likely to have turnover, and you're going to have much higher buy-in than your competitors. How do you do that strategic communication? I've come up with a 4-pillar approach. First is to identify all key constituents and document the assumptions. You're going to have people internally and externally that need to hear your message about strategy. Then you need to craft a very clean message, and we've talked about succinct, no more than 35 words for all the strategy statements, high levels and supporting levels. How do you communicate that easily and have it easy to access? The third piece of this is to speak. This requires a lot of interpersonal interactions and many presentations. You can't just do one type of media. You have to use multimedia tools. You do want to do a lot of this in person. Leaders of an organization should speak to the strategy on a regular basis. And then finally, you want to track the effectiveness by using a few key metrics of awareness and engagement. Here are a few examples. Coca-Cola Company. What do you think of when you think of Coca-Cola? Maybe the polar bear commercials. Optimism, creating value, making a difference, happiness. That takes a lot of effort to get that emotion associated with that brand, both internally and externally according to their mission. Nordstrom, one of my favorite and my wife's favorite places to shop. We love to go to Nordstrom. Why? Because of customer service. That's different than anywhere else. And that's what they do. They focus on that. They message that. And rule number 1, use your good judgment in all situations. Your goal is to try to simplify things in your organization so that the messages from the higher level all the way down to the unit are easily understood and recognized and executed by all of your employees. Simple communication is often the best. Here's one easy example. When I was brought into UNC Chapel Hill, I was to be in charge of the consulting programs. I said there are a few divisions within consulting. Each should have their unique mission, and we're going to set some goals over the next 3 years and have the objectives and initiatives laid out on one page. One of my challenges to you is to get your entire strategy for the next 3 years to one page. This is just an illustration. The rest of this presentation is going to take you through a few tools and examples to get you through this alignment exercise. One of my favorite frameworks of all is the McKinsey 7S model. This is a great tool for alignment in any organization. What you should do is make sure you have alignment in each of these 7 categories, starting with a core strategy in the center, and then moving out from shared values, all the way then to systems, style, staff, skills, and structure. The rest of the slides are a checklist that you can refer to later to make sure that your organization is aligned, enterprise and unit level, with these in mind. For example, on the strategy, the key definition of that is, how do we achieve competitive advantage? What's our source of competitive advantage? What are our key priorities and things that we've talked about in other modules? Structure, how are we organized? Who's doing what? What's the reporting? How do we activities and sub-activities? And what's centralized versus decentralized? That's a big deal in higher ed. There's a lot of tension sometimes between centralized activities and decentralized when they really should be much more consolidated for efficiency purposes. Systems, IT, both formal and informal processes to manage the organization. Staffing, it all comes down to the people. Do we have the right people for the work we're doing? Are we right-sized? Do we have any redundant positions? Skills, how are we training our people? Are they working on the right things? Do we have the capabilities to modify, to adjust to the environment? And then style, leadership style, both leadership and interpersonal. Some would call that culture. Also espoused by shared values. What's important for how we get along? So those are the 7S. The rest of this presentation is just a fly-through of a unit when they created a strategy underneath of the umbrella of UNC Chapel Hill. What's unique about this strategy and what I like about it is they actually were so creative. They started at UNC Chapel Hill, but they merged with a unit at NC State. Bitter rivals on the basketball and football field, but collaborators in this regard. Why? Because UNC had a great medical school and NC State has a great engineering school, so they created biomedical engineering in a joint program. We set out on a strategic planning adventure, and first we looked at the current situation with faculty, staff, graduate, undergraduate students, and then we decided to start the timeline for the strategy. Data-based, I'll take you through this pretty quickly. It's more of an illustration of a successful strategy intervention. We had a task force of key leaders from the biomedical engineering department, and that was complemented by a student team of consultants, and I led this effort. I highly recommend all of you consider, if you're in an academic setting, to leverage your business school, both for faculty and for students, to help with strategic planning efforts. You want to form an advisory committee that checks in 3 times over a strategic planning project to offer multiple perspectives. This is the 3 phases: assessment, visioning, and implementation. Of course, you want to do a SWOT analysis to identify the strengths, weaknesses internally, and then the opportunities and threats externally. I believe that you support that analysis with data. Here, it's analysis of the faculty when they said that their research is on par. And then if we combined NC State and UNC together, it shows that they are on par. One of the biggest issues in this particular case was they were reporting separately to U.S. News and World Report. Then we also looked at funding in terms of the strengths. The weaknesses, the lack of endowment, this is quite clear on this chart compared to the peers, and sometimes this is hard data to gather at the department level, but you can see that the endowment was much smaller than the peers. So we talked about some of the ways that other universities have built up their endowments. Continuing on the journey, the opportunities externally, they wanted to focus on real world problems: healthcare, chronic disease, infectious disease prevention, U.S. economy. Who would have suspected that that focus on infectious disease would prove extremely important in both resource poor plus resource rich environments with COVID-19. The projections are that the employments are going to grow very high, so that's quite an opportunity to leverage. So the SWOT informed it, and we looked at the threats. We also looked at no biomedical engineering has all of these traits, but how do you differentiate? Which ones do you focus on? That led to these strategic priorities: a transformative inter-institutional model, growing global impact, and securing resources, critical for this particular one. And then each one of those priorities had a set of initiatives to accomplish between 2014 and 2019. Then you want to create a timeline for your initiatives by your priority area. So this was priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3. They focused on this, they reported on this, and they reported great progress. They also identified what the potential impact would be, and of course tied it to a budget. You must identify your operating budget and calculating financial impacts over time. So, in summary, enterprise strategy, operations and unit strategy, all the way down to functional. In my next module, I'll talk about the individual level strategy, because that's where it ultimately has to happen for daily decision making. Thank you very much.